Okay, welcome back, and we begin with the novel Nervous Conditions. We begin with the first chapter, and we are going to cover the first 3 chapters in this session. We've already done the background to the novel, and if you haven't watched that video, please go and watch that. So this is going to make more sense once you have seen that video. So let's begin with the novel. The novel itself begins with a very shocking sentence. It literally draws the reader in. I was not sorry when my brother died. Right, so the novel begins with that statement, that shocking statement that immediately draws in the reader. And it is a very flat, very direct statement. So she begins with that, and later she tells a story. She begins with a story about her brother, her relationship with her brother, and then it is only in the end of chapter 3 that we come back to this opening of the novel, the opening movement of the novel. So the first 3 chapters in that sense are a kind of a loop where she begins at this moment, goes on and tells us about the past, and chapter 3 ends with the end of chapter 3. We return to this moment. So she later brings us back to the opening moment of the novel in chapter 3, when Nahamo, the brother, is late in returning from the school as expected. So and the story, the first 3 chapters are about why isn't Tambudzai, or Tambu as she's called, why isn't she sorry that her brother Nahamo is dead. So these chapters are an account of Tambu's relationship to her brother, her family, which is also account of the social and gender structure of society, structure of family, the gendered framework of the traditional society in which she lives. The chapters are an account of Tambu's deteriorating relationship with her brother. It is an account of gender roles as they create alienation, as they create resentment, and as they destroy relationships. So not only are the gender roles unfair, they create conflicts, they alienate the brother and the sister, and they literally destroy the relationship. And one of the most stark episodes in this part of the book is the episode where Tambu cannot go to school. She is denied schooling because the family is too poor, and so she decides to earn her fees by cultivating this small plot of land. She cultivates corn, and then she discovers that there's somebody stealing the corn, and later on she learns that it's her brother, right? It's her brother stealing the corn which she had cultivated for her fees, to pay for her fees. So in a way it seems, and it's particularly, she is enraged, as is the reader when they as are the readers, we as readers, as when we read about it. But it is not about Nahamo. It is not that Nahamo is bad, and we do not really dwell upon this villainy of Nahamo. He is actually a product or a subject of that gendered system where this is permissible, where the father just laughs, and then later on when she gets the money to pay for her fees, father goes to the schoolmaster and demands that money for him. So what Nahamo does is permissible. It's not really a serious thing. We can see that he has gender privilege, which he kind of holds up, with which he taunts Tambu, but he clearly assumes that he has the right. But that is a system that he belongs to, right? He is not really thought about it. He's a young boy. He belongs to that system where this is how the things are. Another very, I think, important part of this episode, this whole the episode about mealies being stolen, is the school teacher Matimba, Mr. Matimba, who takes her to the town once she has her mealies. Then she, the corn, and he takes her to the town where a white woman, Doris, accuses Matimba of using Tambu as a slave labor, right? And she kind of scolds, rebukes Matimba for making the young child work for him to earn money. And it is very interesting because this woman Doris, without knowing anything, assumes, so she's kind of working on the stereotypes that this is how the men are, this is how African society is. So even when they're living in close proximity, it is clear that the two communities do not understand each other. The two communities see each other through the lens of stereotypes. Because when, how does Matimba get money for Tambu? Do they sell the corn? No, they do not. White woman, actually, he appeals to her sense of charity, he appeals to her sense of pity, and the woman just appealing to her sense of pity at the poor condition of Tambu. So the woman Doris gives the money out of charity, not for the mealies, not for the corn. So in a way, Tambu's schooling depends on this white woman's charity. Right. So the point is that they see each other, the two communities see each other through the stereotypes, because even Matimba appealing to Doris at the poor condition, showing Tambu's poor condition, works through the stereotypes where a white person is rich, and once she you appeal to her sense of pity, she would give the money, and they do not really sell the corn. So Tambu's schooling depends, as I said, on a woman's charity, on a white woman's charity. Not only now, it is interesting that it's not only now, but later on, towards the end of the novel, when she goes to the Sacred Heart, this convent school, again it is the nuns who take her because she's good, and she is a charity student, right? They are only one of the few Africans who are taken into that school. It's a kind of a charity offer. Now, another interesting, I think we're just discussing the interesting episodes in the first three novels. Now, another interesting episode is when her mother, when Tambu is really resentful and angry about her lot, her mother tells her about the burdens of womanhood and expects her, or tries to bring her around to acceptance. So let's read that part of the novel. So this is when she has been told that she does not need to be educated, and she's really resentful, she's really angry as a young girl, and she goes to her mother and just tells her that, look at my Garu, she is educated and she's a better wife than you. The mother is too old, too tired to be disturbed by this outpouring. So what does she tell Tambu? She explains that even my Garu knew how to cook, clean and grow vegetables, and then she goes on and tells her, this business of womanhood is a heavy burden. How could it not be? Aren't we the ones who bear children? When it is like that, you can't just decide today I want to do this, tomorrow I want to do that, and the next day I want to be educated. When there are sacrifices to be made, you are the one who has to make them. And these things are not easy. You have to start learning them early, from a very early age. The earlier the better, so that it is easy later on. So in a way, sacrifices, bearing the burden of womanhood is the education that a young woman, a young girl should have. Easy, as if it is never ever easy. And these days it is worse, with the poverty of blackness on one side and the weight of womanhood on the other. And I think this particular line, poverty of blackness on the one side and weight of womanhood on the other, it brings together how the intersection of oppressive subject position that women, like her mother, like Tambu, like Maigaru, all of them occupy. So there is poverty of blackness, the race and poverty, which is directly So racism and poverty, that is a product of colonialism, coupled with the condition of womanhood. So intersection of various kinds of oppression, of multiple forms of oppression in which a woman, an African woman, is placed. What will help you, my child, is to learn to carry burdens with strength, right? Bear your lot. And many of us would have heard that, bear your lot, this is a woman's lot. So in a way, the mother is preparing her, and this is the advice she gives when Tambu comes to her for education, as if this is the education for childhood. And later on we see that there is a lot of resentment and anger in the mother. She is aware that all this is not fair, and yet she thinks that things would be easier for her daughter if she accepts this as the woman's lot. So we see that women like her mother, Maigaru, despite her education, they have chosen not to fight. Right? They have chosen not to fight because they're conditioned to conformity. And later on, we see Maigaru, despite her education, is kind of accepts a position as subservient to her husband's. So they have relinquished control, they have relinquished any kind of advantage if they had any, and chosen conformity, chosen traditional role of woman. Despite education, despite their simmering anger and resentment, they still follow the traditional role. And it is important, I think, later on when Maigaru comes into conflict with her husband, what is a position available to the women outside this traditional gender role? And this we all need to ask, what is a position available to Tambu and Nyasha outside this traditional gendered position that the society that is available to them in the traditional society? The older generation, the mothers, have clearly accepted, they surrendered to this gendered society, and here Tambu's mother is trying to get her to accept that you must learn to carry your burdens with strength. Now, what is the position, and this is something that I would keep asking, what is the position available to Tambu and Nyasha outside this gendered, traditional gender roles? Now, another important incident in this part, in the initial chapters, is where Tambu tells her about her grandmother, the inexorable cultivator of land. And we see that women not only look after, and it's not just the household chores, whether it is Tambu's mother, Tambu herself, the grandmother, they all work in the field. So they're working in the house, they're also working in the fields. Everything, it seems to be, is a woman's lot, a woman's burden. So the grandmother cultivates the family fields. She is she's called the inexorable cultivator of the land. And Tambu remembers the time when she worked with her grandmother, and the grandmother would tell her the story of the family, right? The story of the family. Again, the grandmother is trying to teach her hard work. She praising my predisposition towards working, she consolidated it in me as a desirable habit. Learn to work hard. For the mother links it clearly to the woman's lot. But the grandmother tells us a story which Tambu tells us are history lessons. And these are important because the history that the grandmother talks about or tells Tambu is not the history that she would find in the textbooks, right? But it is the indigenous history. It is the history from the other side, not the history written by the British colonizers about the conditions in Africa, the society of Africa when the colonizers came in, but the history as told by an old African woman, right? And if you learn So this is my grandmother's own portion of history strung together from beginning to end. So as they cultivate, they learn this. She learns this history. So yeah, on the one hand there is formal education, and on the other hand there is this informal education, which we see the informal kind of wisdom which is passed from mother to daughter, from the grandmother to the granddaughter. So a kind of alternate system of knowledge which the colonial education cannot give them, but this is indigenous knowledge, right? And when we later talk about education, we would come back to this story and this kind of history. Now the story tells us about the past of the family, and they were clearly not as poor. The soil is ripe, so they lived in a place where the soil was ripe, and the grandfather was rich in the currency of those days. So it's not just that it was a currency of those days. What was the currency of those days? Cattle, large fields, 4 wives who worked hard to produce bountiful harvests. So this is the currency. This is what makes a person rich. So the grandfather was her husband. The grandmother's, the grandfather was a rich man, and he was a trader. There is a big corral. Corral is where the cattle house, I think. Yeah. So and she claims that she was beautiful, and Tambu completely agrees with her grandmother. So what happens to the family? What happened to the family that was rich? The soil was rich. The family, it was a productive family. What happened? Wizards, she tells, now the story takes on a very mythical kind of, and this we see in folklore. It comes on where we cannot distinguish where it is factual and where it is fantastical. So here it takes on a little fantastical element. The grandmother tells her, wizards well versed in treachery and black magic came from the south and forced the people from the land. At last the people came, so the people are forced out of the land. This family is forced out of the land. Who are the wizards? Wizards well versed in treachery. So on donkey, on foot, on horse, on ox car, the people looking for a place to live. But the wizards were avaricious and grasping. There was less and less land for the people. So the wizards are taking over the land, and the people are being dispossessed, deracinated. At last the people came upon the grey sandy soil of the homestead, so stony and barren that the wizards would not use it. There they built a home. But the third born son, my grandfather, lured by the wizard's whispers of riches and luxury and driven by the harshness of the homestead, took himself and his family to one of the wizard's farms. What is happening here? Only to find that they had been enticed into slavery. I hope you remember a little bit of Walcott here, Afolabi and his son. So what exactly has happened here is the wizards here are clearly the English colonizers who come in, force people out of their land, dispossess them. People are impoverished, and then there are promises of riches and luxury always there, always out to reach. So people are not only dispossessed, they're also given an unreachable dream, so that they keep on working. So where do they work? They go and work for the Englishman in the wizard's farm. So he goes on to work in the grandfather goes on to work in the wizard's farm. But one day my grandfather managed to escape. So they are enslaved. So enticed into slavery. First dispossessed and then lured into slavery with the promise of riches and luxury. But one day my grandfather managed to escape to glittering gold mines in the south, where good men were said to be quickly made rich. The white wizard had no use of women and children. He threw my grandmother and children off his farm. So destitute, they traveled back to the homestead where my great-grandfather, although he had not regained his former standard of living, had managed to keep the family together. Then my great-grandfather died, and the family broke up. And it turned out that my grandfather had not been a good man, for he was skilled in the mines. So he runs away from slave labor, goes chasing again this impossible dream, and is killed. And my grandmother is left with 6 children to support. So we see how slowly the family is dispossessed and impoverished. And then she heard that being similar in appearance to the wizards, but not them, for these were holy, and set up a mission not far from the homestead. So after the colonialists come the missionaries. She walked with my uncle, with Baba Mukuru, who was 9 years old and wearing a loin cloth, to the mission where the holy wizards took him in. They set him to work in the farm by day. So again, laboring on the farm. So the condition of that is a condition. Hard work is a condition for the missionary taking up this 9-year-old boy. And by night he is educated in their wizardry, right? She calls it wizardry. What is that wizardry? English education, right? For my grandmother, being sagacious and having foresight, had begged them to prepare him for a life in their world, right? A life in their world. And that is exactly what happens. Baba Mukuru learns English, goes to England, comes back, gets a job at the missionary school where he might have studied, and becomes the headmaster. It is a truly romantic story to my ears, a fairy tale of reward and punishment, of cause and effect. It had a moral too, a tantalizing moral that increased your aspirations but not beyond a manageable level. What are the aspirations? Education, to improve, right? But we'll see that this education business is again problematic, but that is how he finds a way out of poverty that is enforced on this family by the colonialism, colonial enterprise, by colonizers. And the way out is also shown by English men and women, the missionaries, who embrace him, train him in English education, English language, and that's how supposedly show him a way out of poverty. And the conclusion that young Tambu draws from this is that this indicated that life could be lived with a modicum of dignity in any circumstances if you worked hard enough and obeyed the rules. It's important to obey the rules. Whose rules? Right? To be successful in Rhodesia, where it is white colonizers, whose rules are to be obeyed? Yes, it was a romantic story the way my grandmother told it. The suffering was not minimized, but the message was clear. Endure, work hard, endure, suffer, and obey, for there is no other way. Endure and obey. Is it the same story that her mother is telling about the burdens of womanhood? Endure and obey. For there is no other way. She was so proud of her eldest son who had done exactly this. But at the same time, that eldest son also become anglicized. The family is not comfortable with either with this Englishness and with their traditional roots. So we'll come back to this idea of English education. So and we see, so grandmother's fairy tale is history from the other side. It is an alternate history of Africa, where it talks about the impoverishment of the African population, their dispossession, dislocation, alienation, and this is the other side of colonial domination. This is a history that is not taught in the school, and there is a kind of religion, Christianity, education, and colonial enterprise. It comes together to hold out this promise of riches, this unreachable dream of riches, dignity, a modicum of dignity, only if you endure and obey. This is what education tells them. This is what Christianity, the religion, And that's a message of the colonial enterprise: endure and obey. So the alienation that I have been talking about, alienation, not being comfortable in your own surrounding, feeling alienated, we see that in the family, in Baba Mukru's family, when they returned after 5 years from England. There is a great debate before they go, and Tambu tells us that there was a debate before they went whether the children and Maigaru should go or not, but they still go because the father thinks that they would get some kind of exposure, some kind of education advantages, some advantages by going to England. What happens is that what is the cost of those advantages? Alienation from their cultural roots, because when they come back, when the children come back, the first thing that Tambu is so surprised, one is Nyasha's dress, and the second is that they cannot speak the language. They have forgotten the language, and forgotten the language means that they are out of place in the family. They are not able to communicate with their cousins. So literally we see the alienation that has happened due to embracing English language and English education. The other thing that Tambu dwells on for a while is Nyasha's dress. Tambu thinks that it is not appropriate, that she is westernized, and that the dress is not acceptable in the Rhodesian society. So when we talk about, let's talk about Nyasha here. So Nyasha this is a choice. Let's say this dress is a choice that she makes of wearing the dress. After all, her choice of clothes, it is her decision, right? But the choices available to Nyasha are circumscribed. Either, if she dresses up, she could either dress up traditionally and therefore fit into the tradition of and therefore fit in the traditional society. If she chooses not to fit in the tradition, then what is the other? Westernization. So do you understand? The two poles available to these two young girls, Nyasha for now, she is already dealing with that. Tambu later on would deal with that. What are the choices available? What are the choices available to these girls? So either going on with their traditional roles as their mother, following their mothers like Maigaru and Manini and so on, or use their education. But once they use their education, again they do not find a place where they would fit, because after all they are African women, they are colored women, they are not they do not, despite the fact that they can speak the language and have undergone English education, they would not become English, right? So what are the subject positions available to her? Is there any ground that is available to these young girls like Nyasha or Tambu to where they can distance themselves from traditional, gendered and oppressive society, and also from the westernized, equally oppressive colonial conditions? Is there any ground available to these two young girls or to the women in general? So they can either be too westernized, or they can be good African girls who submit to the society that is so unfair to women. So going back to the question that we raised in the last video, the Bildungsroman, is there any way for Nyasha and Tambu to grow up and fit in, and where would they fit in? Is there any space available for them to fit in? Going on, Nahamu's death, I think, and that's where she ends chapter 3. We come to chapter 3, going looped back to the beginning of the novel. Now Nahamu dies of a disease, most probably meningitis, when he is at his uncle's place, going to the school, the missionary school, and the mother blames the uncle and the missionary school of taking away the son, and of course Maigaru. uh, they are blamed for taking away her son. And we'll come back, Manini comes back again and again of, you know, the missionary school, English education, Englishness represented by Baba Mukuru and Mai Garu. They, you know, they have, you know, she resents them for claiming her children. Now, we have already seen the alienation, and we have already before this we saw the alienation between the brother and the sister due to gender privilege that Nahamo assumes and does not think about, and which Tambu resents. And now English education that has distanced him further, right? So the sense of privilege has multiplied. He doesn't like coming home, he doesn't even carry his luggage, he doesn't like to do the chores, and he forgets Shona. So forgetting the language, you know, the very basic tool of communication. The family cannot speak English and he cannot speak Shona. So literally language alienates him right away from the family. So we see in Nahamo we see a young man being distanced from his cultural roots, from his family, by education. And so it carries forth this theme of alienation that we already see when, which is already evident when Baba Mukuru and the family returns from England. It kind of culminates in Nahamo's death. Now, other thing I want to leave you thinking is Tambu's character, right? What kind of she is a very spirited young woman, very driven. Just keep in mind how her character is in the beginning, and what is her character arc, how she changes. So, very enterprising, hardworking, and also independent in mind. So, whatever her father might tell, whatever her mother might tell, she has her own mind to think. So, where would such an independent minded girl go on and fit in these options or non-options available to her? Okay, so next video we go on to the next 3 chapters.